identification units. But I hear that Stan is live, and so Stan, I'm going to invite you to step onto the stage and introduce Ben for us.
Thank you, Anton. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon with you all, and we welcome you to this webinar, whether you're connecting this morning, this afternoon, or this evening. It's a privilege to have Ben Payne with us presenting on how not to fix people, including yourself. Many people working and living in poor communities have recognized the damage caused by projects designed to fix people, and I think we can attest to that no matter where we live or who we interact with. And in response, alternative approaches have focused on drawing alongside people and working together with them. But what is it that we are achieving? What ways are best enabling us to deal with the pain when unable to make those corrections in challenging situations? Where is God in these encounters? Well, these are some of the questions that Ben will help us reflect on today. But let me introduce to you Ben Payne, our presenter today. Ben works for Remedi, one of the UK's leading deliverers of restorative justice, specializing in adult services. He recently spent 6 years living in South Bristol as part of an urban expression community. Ben is completing graduate studies in restorative justice and likes to think that someday he will become a professional foot golfer. That I want to see myself. So Ben, it's a privilege to have you here. We're excited about today's presentation. And please join me on stage, and we look forward to what you have to share with us. Thank you.
Hello. Well, hopefully that's all worked okay. The foot golf thing, I'm hoping one day to be a professional foot golfer, but I haven't actually tried it yet, so I feel like that's yet to come. I've recently moved to Hull in the UK from Bristol. And they have a foot golf course not far away from where I live, and I've discovered it, and essentially you kick a football around a golf course, and to me that sounds like a genius idea. So hopefully one day I can become a professional foot golfer, because I feel that's a good way to spend your life. Anyway, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to introduce myself and a little bit of my story, how my wife Katie and I ended up moving down to Bristol and what we experienced there. It's broadly what I want to talk about is this kind of a different approach. It builds on Andrew Grinnell's seminar for anyone, webinar even, for anyone that saw that, which was talking about just friendship. And it builds on that, the idea of drawing alongside people. What we found when we moved down into the south of Bristol was to work on an estate that had very high levels of unemployment. It hit all sorts of marks on all the deprivation statistics, and we were drawn there because our understanding was that the church doesn't go to those sorts of places very often, and we wanted to have an impact, to have a positive impact there. And what we found quite quickly was that people were used to projects being run, people used to things being done to them. And as a result of that, there was quite a lot of cynicism. There was quite a lot of kind of rejection of new people arriving, and that made us just think through a bit of what we were doing. And I mean, I started work as a postman for a while, and I was doing some volunteering locally in the community, and then I also moved into helping young people find employment, young men find employment, and then finally working at an advice centre. And during that time, the common theme that I felt anyway was that actually what people needed that was different, and what we needed to do that was different, was to draw alongside people rather than to just do things to people. And I really picked that up from Andrew Grinnell's seminar as well, and that was really helpful. So rather than go over kind of the reasons behind that and what we did, I mean, it was a great time of doing things like breakfast groups and poker nights and football and things like that, things that meant that we were sharing our life together rather than just running projects. But what came out of that was a lot of challenges. And I'm sure other people who have tried to do similar things have run into those same challenges. And so I'd like to kind of reflect on some of our experiences, and see what you guys think who are in the room, and hopefully we can learn together. I found Anna Ruddick also did one recently, and she talked about our theology needing to be simple and deep. And I'm hoping that's what this will be, this next hour or so will be. I can't claim to be academic and know big long words about theology. In fact, it took me a very long time to be convinced that I should think about theology at all, because I'm a bit stubborn like that. My learning is mainly on experience, practice, and then thinking about it. And I do think that can result in some simple but deep theology. So hopefully that's what we'll get out of this evening. I've also put a picture of Bob the Builder on the front there, because his little tagline is, "Can we fix it? Yes, we can." And I'm sort of saying, no, we can't. So that just pleased me. I thought that was funny. So that was mainly for myself. I want to start with a picture. This is from the estate that we lived on. This is my godson, actually the son of one of the people in the room at the moment. This in many ways, to me, it summed up our quite a lot about our experience there. I don't want to say a huge amount of the picture yet, because I'm going to come back to it later. But I just wanted to put it up there as an idea of to sort of stir some discussion. So perhaps if there's thoughts that you get from looking at the picture, then it would be interesting to hear what you think. It was a park that was right next door to our house. We lived with another couple, and they had 2 children. This is their oldest, and this was one of the slides that was there. And I felt it said a lot about us coming onto the estate and how we were approaching the estate. So I'll talk about that more later, but I just wanted to sort of start with that as a bit of a thought provoker, hopefully. So I'm going to move on to these are all the original. There was another one that I was hoping would be there. It doesn't look like it is. That's okay. So I've got a few things. I'll say them. Signs that trying to fix it isn't working. So I think all of us have kind of at different times had, whether it's projects or whether it's at work, we're doing things where we're trying to help other people. And actually what I'm saying this evening or this afternoon, depending on where you are, is that ultimately that doesn't work. Ultimately, because of who we are and because of the people we're with, that doesn't work. And I kind of a few signs to me point out when this isn't working, and I'd like to just talk through them, because I think all of us might recognize these. So the first one that comes up is anger for those you're trying to help. So I've found if I'm trying to help someone and trying to support them and it's not working out, one of the options is I get quite angry with them and I blame it on them. I can become disappointed in myself, feel like I'm not achieving everything I want to achieve. There can be disillusionment with God, a kind of a sense of, I've done everything I should, these people don't deserve this, God, where are you? Why aren't you doing something about this? That can come up. That can also result in apathy. It can result in giving in and actually not caring for people anymore. When stuff goes wrong for long enough, it can result in feeling like, actually, I can't do this anymore and I can't cope. I have no more capacity for compassion, for caring. Can cause an inability to rest. I know a lot of people who have become workaholics in trying to help people and actually are just relentless in doing more and more work and striving harder and harder. And the only response when something goes wrong is to strive harder and harder and do more and more work. So that's another thing that can happen. The other thing I think that I found this in myself as well, I found all of these in myself, is a certain self-importance or isolation. When you're trying to fix people, you're trying to help people, and it's not working, eventually you start to think, do you know what, I'm the only one that thinks the right things here. So you become more and more isolated. You become more and more withdrawn from other people who are doing similar things. And actually that can be quite dangerous. And I think that's another sign. So if there's any of those, so anger with those you're trying to help, disappointment in self, disappointment in God, disillusionment with God, apathy, an inability to rest, or self-importance or isolation, if any of those things come up for you, I think that's suggesting that we're missing something. I think that's suggesting that we're trying to fix people and maybe we need a different approach. So those are just some of the signs. Like I said, Andrew talked about this quite a lot more, and it's a great webinar, so watch it maybe after this one's finished. I'm going to move on to this. This is where it links in a little bit with restorative justice for me. This relationship window. Now, I kind of hate to reduce everything, especially when I'm talking about relationships and drawing alongside people. I hate to reduce it to some boxes, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's right because it's boxes. But so please, if you want to critique or ask questions, then do. But I find this a really helpful way of noticing whether we are treating people in certain ways as well. So the bottom left, actually I'm going to use this arrow because I can. The bottom left here is when you're treating people with very low expectation and very low support. So that would be objects we ignore. So I'd hope that none of us would ever treat people in that way. Now, a common thing with when you go to do projects to help people, or you go and live somewhere, or your work is in a part of helping people, is to actually treat people as objects of need. What's interesting there is that's not that's how we treat animals. That's how we treat pets rather than people. So that in itself is actually degrading and dehumanizing, because you're treating someone as someone who just needs more stuff and they just need care and nothing else. I think many of us fall into that trap of treating people like that. Treating people and doing things to them rather than for them is another trap, and that can be sometimes when that apathy and that lack of compassion comes. That's when we can start to do things to people, and we have incredibly high expectations but not much care anymore. Now, interestingly, again, that's how we treat machines. We expect a lot from our computers. People are expecting a lot from their computers this evening, and some people are being successful, others aren't. And that's where we act in that way, where we provide something. We consider that we've done everything we should, and they should therefore behave in a certain way. And at that point, I think we need a recognition that that's not working either. That's quite dehumanizing. Now, these 2 and the 4, I don't think we should beat ourselves up when we're behaving like that. We quite often will fall into that trap, but I just think we need to be aware of it in the same way that we're aware of the list of things, the signs when we're trying to fix people, the list of things in ourselves that come up. I think we should be aware of all of these things. And the ideal is that we work with people. And when you work with people, you're honouring them as a human being, and you are expecting a lot of them as a human being because they are a human being, but you're also caring about them. And that sense of drawing alongside is incredibly different. Actually, it's incredibly different to a standard practice of running projects and of fixing people. And it requires something quite different. So from there, just with a brief overview, I'll move my little arrow now. What I've found with this is that actually it's not quite as simple as just saying, oh, we should draw alongside others. It doesn't work quite like that. It doesn't mean that, oh, this is the solution, therefore it's all fine. And part of why I wanted to approach this webinar in the way I have is that I think there has to be a reality when we try something new and we try something different. There has to be a reality about our interactions with people, and there has to be a reality about allowing ourselves to be critiqued. So I've just put a few things up there of the challenges of drawing alongside others. It seems to have shrunk in, so the words have bumped around a bit. But the big challenge, these are 2 things in particular that I've found very challenging when trying to work with people rather than for them or to them. One thing is this real difficulty of what do we do when it doesn't work? There's a number of different examples I could give of when you actually work for quite a long time with someone and you don't see any change, and that can be incredibly hard. And actually, if you're running a project, say for example you're opening a school, at the end of that, regardless of whether it works or not, you can say to people, do you know what, we opened a school, that was a good thing. But if you're focusing on relationship building, as like I said, was in the Just Friendship webinar, if you're focusing on that relationship building, if it doesn't work, you're left in a place where you can say, well, I built some good relationships. And that can be quite difficult because it feels like you haven't got anything tangible. And actually, it's quite a risk that if it doesn't work, you're not left with something that you can offer people. You're not left with something where you can say what you've done, or you can even have a tangible benefit to it. And that's a real challenge that I've found. And ultimately, alongside that, if we're wrong, if this isn't the right thing to do, to take this approach of working alongside people, we're risking everything on it. Actually, we are then not building, putting all our effort into running some massive project, but we're actually saying we're going to build relationships with people and we're going to focus on that. And if we're wrong, that's a real risk, which links into the idea of it being quite small and the challenge there. It's quite difficult to stay committed to a project that's small when you know the impact is limited to those few people you're working with in that area that you're working in. It's quite hard to measure it. How can you see if you've had a success if you're working with 3 or 4 people? What does success even mean? And also, there can be big injustices that aren't being dealt with. We've just had an election here in the UK, and for a number of us, the result is quite challenging, and it can kind of bring this sense of, well, actually, what are we doing working kind of in a small sense along with other people when we need big change, when actually change comes about from MPs making big decisions, doesn't it? Like that's what really happens. And so I think this idea of staying small, of working alongside people, can be really challenging. Now, what I'd like to do, it'd be great. I've got a few questions that I'm going to put up. I'd like to hear if anyone else has got if they've had similar experiences of trying to draw alongside people and build relationships rather than run projects, and some of the experiences people have had. If there's other people who have had things that have been difficult, reasons why they think that the fixing it projects are better than the drawing alongside, anything like that. I'm going to go into discussing these 2 points here after that, but if there's other things that come up, I'd really like to talk about it. So I'm going to put a few questions, hopefully. There they are. I'm going to put a few questions up there. If there's any thoughts that people have in relation to that, it'd be great if you could just stick something in the box. And if there's not much there, we can just move on and I'll carry on talking. But it'd be great to have a little break. So I'll move. I think I asked Stan to come back up. Is the plan? If he's around.
Hi,
Stan.
Good questions, and I'll add my comment verbally or vocally instead of in the chat box. One thing that it brings to mind is that perhaps people do not change if the change conflicts with their values. That's one thing that I was going to say. And so I can see where the issue of walking alongside people is difficult, because how are you going to fix their values if they've been, if you want to call it, steeped in those for so long?
Mm-hmm. And in the sense of how long do you continue walking alongside someone if the values aren't changing?
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting.
And how do you
carry on?
And how do you go about working with them to understand what their values are?
And I think that's what's really interesting here, and this is where potentially I might push something too far, and I'd be very happy to be critiqued, is I think even that question is coming from our need to fix people. So actually kind of implicit within the question is, how do we still change their values? And I think there's something in the process of drawing alongside people that means we have to give up quite a lot of that. And I think there's a real tension there, actually. There's a real tension, because that doesn't mean we just walk along and accept everything. But it does mean that if their values don't change, we still treat them as a human being and walk alongside them. But there's a real tension there. Like that's easier said than done. That's to continue walking alongside someone when they're behaving in a way like that can actually result in burnout. It can result in exhaustion and frustration. So that's not a simple thing at all.
Yeah. We're getting some responses. Mike makes a great comment. How do you know your own values are the right values? Good comeback. And then also Mark says, how do we struggle with the question of why we get to say that their values are wrong when they are different from ours? So some very good comments from both Mike and Mark. Would you want to comment on those?
Yeah, I mean, something for me, it's really important, and it comes back to that idea of working with people, is actually you go somewhere else together. So that process of working with people is recognizing that I have my set of values, you have your set of values. We have somewhere else to go together in this, and actually to do that, you have to. Part of why I put the how not to fix people, including yourself, is to do that. You have to accept that you're broken as well. And you're two broken people coming together. And you haven't just got your values that are right that we need to now impose on other people, but we're going to find something together, and we're journeying something that is towards something that's bigger than us. And actually that's where God still comes in. Just because we're not saying that I've got the right Christian values doesn't mean that we're saying God isn't there anymore, but we're saying that something can be found that's quite unique and special by us being together and working together.
Yeah. Mike says he's just giving us the easy questions. So we want the tough ones, Mike. Throw them at
Yeah, come on, I'm not here for long.
We like tough questions as well. So we still have some people typing in. Mike says you go somewhere together. He likes that comment. How is it, values, beliefs, conclusions that we draw are based on assumptions that we make over and over, and so those assumptions begin to become the core for our decisions and the beliefs and the decisions we make.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that you work with assumptions that people have that also that shape those values?
Can you give an example of an assumption that might shape a value, like an example of?
Yeah. So for example, if you were to see me always showing up to a meeting in this blue shirt,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't wear anything else, what would you begin to assume about me?
Right, I'd assume you're a person who wears blue shirts.
Blue shirts. And so and then if you always saw the same the shirts with a stain on it, what else, so it's that kind of thing. And so soon those assumptions, unless we deviate from those or draw on new data or new sources of information, those assumptions become the source of our information.
Sure.
And so we bring that into engagements with people.
And I think it's really important, actually. Thanks for clarifying. One of the things in the first picture is because it's that play area, we make all kinds of assumptions about that area because of the play area. And a kind of a little snippet of what I'll talk about a little more after is that Charlie, the little boy in the picture, doesn't make those assumptions. He's able to see straight through that, actually. And there's something quite important that we can learn there. And actually the process of either doing projects to people or doing things for people, it separates us from people. And the working with people, it challenges. If we let it challenges those assumptions because we meet things in people that we don't expect. And that's what it opens us up to. And that's where I think there is a dual thing of a tension and a challenge, but actually a real privilege of being opened up to something more than what we would have discovered if we'd just been separate from them.
Let's get to, there are a couple more comments coming in. Ben makes a comment, working for people means that the work you do with them has a clear start-finish. Working with people as such requires a much bigger commitment, which is not always possible for all people to encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And then Katie makes a comment. It seems that recognizing the whole person, people for good or ill, as valuable is the only way to work with them, as well as the situation struggles that they inhabit. And Mark makes a comment about my shirt. So, but I'm just going to give you an opportunity if you want to respond to the questions, and then move on, and then we'll move on with your presentation.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, I think there's something really key there. There's a couple of things that are showing the extra that's needed when you decide to work with people, and that's why I want there to be a reality of reflecting on what it means. That actually, I think we can get quite good at sort of saying, this is how it should be, we all need to just be able to work with people and then it'd be fine. But actually that really takes it out of you, and it's quite exhausting, and it requires challenging of its assumptions. It requires a really full engagement with people, and it means that it's harder to rest. It means it's harder to end a project and to begin a new one, because it's people and it takes time, and that's quite exhausting. So I think that's what I will move on, because I think that's what I'd like to talk about a little bit more, if that's okay. Yeah, thanks, Dan. There's one question there that Mike said about how do we tell the difference between our own assumptions and values, which are based on biblical truth, which is quite interesting. I just mentioned that. I'll try and talk about that later, maybe. So what do we do when it doesn't work? I'd like us to watch a little video, and then I'll carry on talking. Enton, I don't know if you could get me up the Desmond Tutu one. Brilliant. It's not the best quality, but it's a great little snippet.
In our country, we've got something called Ubuntu, 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 Ubuntu. When I want to praise you, I say, you, Ubuntu. This person has Ubuntu. Because in our culture, there is no such thing as a solitary individual. We say a person is a person through other persons, that we belong in the bundle of life. And I want you to be all you can be, because that's the only way I can be all I can be. I need you. I need you to be you, so that I can be me. And that's why, you see, when you dehumanize another, whether you like it or not, inexorably you are yourself dehumanized. Just look at what the death penalty does to people. So I want you to get out of here and be those who say, this is a wonderful world. It's a wonderful world.
I really I love that video. I love the bit right at the end there where, I don't know if you catch it, because it's drifting out, and he just says, let us be those people who say, it's a wonderful world, it's a wonderful world. And I'm always so astounded by Desmond Tutu being able to say that when he's gone through all that he's gone through. He's talking about something really significant, this idea, a very old African idea of Ubuntu, and he says it a lot better than I do. And it's this fantastic idea that actually we're not an individual. I was talking with a friend earlier today, and we were talking about how we've got this idea that particularly that comes from idea of Christianity and church, that it's about
Okay, Ben, I think we've got you back.
I'm hoping.
Yep, just pick right back up. You're good.
Grace. I'll carry on. So there wasn't too long a drop there. So there's something really important in saying that actually when we're drawing alongside someone, and this is the reason that I've put up there, it's not a risk or a sacrifice, but a privilege. When we're drawing alongside someone, it's not something where we're actually we're giving of ourselves, but it's actually something where we have an opportunity to meet God. And this idea of Ubuntu, this kind of old African idea, is that you can't be who you are if the other person isn't who they are. And it sounds all a bit weird, but there's this kind of shift I think we need to make. Just before we were cut off, I was saying that I've got a friend who I was chatting to earlier, and he said about our relationship with God and how it's just us and God. And actually, there's a Quaker idea that says that there's that of God in each of us. And I really like that, and I think that quite fundamentally changes how we approach each other. And it means that when we encounter each other as human beings, we're encountering God. And actually in that encounter, there's something that happens between us that means that we encounter more of God than we would have if we hadn't met them. And there's something in the encounter, if you're encountering someone who's vulnerable, in that you encounter more of God, because they're not able to hide who they are. They're not able to hide everything about themselves. And I think there's something quite special here that we really need to get a hold of, because it's not that when we're drawing alongside people, it's exhausting and tiring and it wears us down. That's kind of true, but actually there's something life-giving that we don't get by running the projects. There's something life-giving that we don't get when we separate ourselves off from other human beings. And that phrase that Desmond Tutu used, that he says, when you dehumanize another, you dehumanize yourself. And actually we really need to recognize that. And what I would say is we need to recognize when we're dehumanizing other people by running projects or by treating people either like animals or like computers. We dehumanize people in ways that we don't realize sometimes, and it's out of the best of intentions. I don't want everyone to go around beating themselves up saying I'm a terrible person for trying to help people, but there's something really important about the way that we interact with other people. And if in order to interact with other people on that level, we have to scale back what we're doing and we have to interact with people at a longer level, on a smaller level, then actually that's the deal. That's what means that we meet God in a way that we wouldn't have otherwise. And to think that we can achieve everything without having that interaction is to miss the point, actually, and it's to miss what makes us different by having this idea of God and by following Jesus, because he gave us this example and he encouraged us to be in a certain way, and that's what makes us different from the rest of the planet, is that we value this smallness, we value this interaction, and we're willing to keep going even when it doesn't work. The other two on there, the do we not all fail already, is a comment on the fact of what do we do when it doesn't work? What does doesn't work mean? And actually, ultimately, for me, so for example, I worked with a chap for a while, and this is me doing projects whilst trying to draw alongside people, and we were trying to sort out his housing. Now he'd had a drug issue for a very long time, been in and out of prison, and he was in a lot of need as well. There were multiple needs. He was clean from drugs, but he was homeless, and his health was terrible because of the long-term abuse of his body. Now he that one day he came in to the centre where I was working, and he was really excited. He said, I've got a house. I'm moving in. I'm moving in next week. And he'd finally got a house sorted. We'd been waiting for it for 4 months. And then the next day he passed away. Now, does that mean we failed? Does that mean it didn't work? Does that mean that drawing alongside that person was worthless because actually he wasn't there when the good thing came at the end? I don't think anyone would really think that. I don't think anyone would think that, and people would see value in the relationship that had been built up over that time. There was deep pain, there was deep sorrow. For me, there was a real struggle of getting to grips with what it was all for, and why this particular guy didn't get to have his house. But there was an incredible value and encounter in that relationship, and it was worth it because it was worth it. It didn't need the outcome to make it worth it. Now, the outcomes are great for us as human beings, and they make us feel like we've achieved something, and they do give a human comfort which is needed. I don't doubt that for a second, but we can't, if actually we end up focusing on the end game, if we end up focusing on the outcomes, the human outcomes that we can measure, I think we're going to miss what Desmond Tutu talks about with Ubuntu. We're going to miss these encounters with each other, and we're going to miss an encounter with God. I do think that the last thing on the slide there, we must trust people who have gone before us. There's so many people I talk to who have done work with others and tried to help people with most of their lives, incredible people. The common theme whenever I talk to them is, I wish I'd spent more time building relationships. I've never heard one person say, I wish I'd spent more time on that building project. I wish I'd spent more time on that project where I was going to have a school or a sports centre, or I wish I'd spent more time developing my business strategy. Never. I've never heard anyone say that. Yet we all still carry on doing projects because we need it. We need it to satisfy our own egos. I understand that. I do that myself. But I really do think we need to listen to people. We need to listen to people who have gone before us and who are telling us, invest in relationships, invest in people. That's where you encounter God. It's not in the projects. It's not in running things. It's not in being successful. It's in relationships with people. And we really need to hear that, because we're going to be saying exactly the same things, hopefully in 40 years' time. But we're going to say the same things, and actually we need to listen to people who are saying it ahead of us, if there are those of you there who are ahead of us as well. The other real challenge that's made it really tricky to read there, hasn't it? The smallness is very difficult. The smallness of working alongside people is very hard to cope with. A few comments related to that. There's so many stories that Jesus tells about smallness. So a good friend of ours used to make bread in front of us to demonstrate what yeast does in the loaf. And Mike, who's here in the room, is a keen bread maker. When Jesus tells the story about the woman working the yeast into the dough, the yeast is the tiniest ingredient, and yet it has this incredible effect. And actually the smallness is okay, and actually the yeast disappears, which I think is very interesting. I wonder how many of us would be happy if our reputation disappeared and it had this wonderful impact on people around us, but people didn't know about us. I think I'd struggle with that quite a lot. I think we like to have a project with our name on it, especially as the church. We really do. But actually we're scared of having a small impact because we can only measure it in our human terms. We can only measure it in our 80 or so years that we have on this planet. And the planet's been going for billions of years. So who are we to decide what's small and what's not? If we're having encounters with God, then surely that's investing in something that lasts a lot longer than the projects that we're running. And so I think when we get worried about it being small, it's because we're struggling to trust God through the whole thing. I think that's what causes that. Jesus himself, when he was crucified, the Roman Empire was still there. It was still the same. It hadn't been overthrown. And in fact, the Christianity that people kind of gathered around once he was gone, got absorbed into the Roman Empire. So I can't imagine he would have been delighted about that, but it happened, and the smallness of his interaction with people meant that the state stayed the same. And I think, again, that's very interesting when we think about elections, we think about the power that all of us want. The very person we're claiming to follow at his moment of death and then resurrection, the empire still stood. And I think that's a very interesting thing to consider. One final comment. I'll move on to this Jean Vanier quote, if you can read it. So our focus on the outside, our focus on how we can achieve a peacefulness for other people, how we can run projects that make other people better, can actually move us away from a focus on ourselves and our own relationship with other people. So running projects that start and finish can mean that we can achieve something in a short period of time without having to actually engage with other people on a deep level. As I've already said, I think we miss out because of that. I think we miss out on the privilege of sharing life with others and encountering God because of that. But also we make a presumption that we make a presumption about our own values being right, and we make a presumption that we can have a positive impact on other people without fully engaging in our own lives and in our own journeys with God. This quote from Jean Vanier, I'll read it out. It is easy to want peace and love peace. It is easy to say, leave me in peace, but are we prepared to struggle for peace, which would mean to enter into places of conflict in the family, in the community, wherever? And if we are prepared to enter into places of conflict, are we aware that we are vulnerable and can be hurt? We can talk about peace, world peace, but we must also talk about peace in our families. If our families are places of love, if parents and children are helping each other to become fully human, to become fully alive, then peace will come in our land. Peace will come between cultures. Peace will come in our world. And I think that's something that I want to stress really strongly. And it's something I've seen at work, at home.
We've lost Ben's broadcast again, but hopefully he'll be able to recover here in just a minute. Hold tight while we get him back. Thanks, friends. Good. That's a sign that Ben's coming back up. So Ben, just step back on stage when you can and be able to pick right back up. As Stan said in the chat window, feel free to use this pause to share your thoughts and questions. Ben, good. Got you coming back up, so hello. You can just continue again.
Okay. I'm happy. Where did I drop off? What I can do, because I was just rambling on about the quote. But what I'll do is I'll move on to some questions now, if you like. Let's open it up, and then we'll take it from there.
Ben, Mike asked a question related to working with people. Do you think we can organize projects that facilitate the kinds of relationships you are talking about rather than the projects that by default keep people from true relationship?
It's a really good question. And I want to be very honest about my interaction when I was working in South Bristol. I always ended up doing jobs and projects. So it's very hard. The reality of trying to implement this drawing alongside people is very hard. You have to financially sustain yourself. You have to actually kind of look at ways to respond when people express need. So it isn't quite as simple as just being able to kind of draw alongside people, full stop. What I do think should underpin all of the projects that we run is whether we call it mentoring or buddying or whatever we want to call it. I think that should underpin everything we do, and it should underpin everything we do for both the mentor and the mentee, because actually for the people who are supposedly the ones who are in a better place, and I do appreciate that people's lives will be together, they have a lot to learn from people who are in a vulnerable and fragile place, and a lot to encounter of God in that relationship. So I think that does need to underpin everything we do. I think it changes how we run projects, because we genuinely understand the situations that people are in, and also we're changed when we interact with people in that way. We move away from doing things to people or for people, because we can't bring ourselves to be like that anymore, because we've been walking alongside with other people.
Katie makes a wonderful comment. The challenge is to look at the value of the journey towards a desired destination. There are no guarantees that things will work out, that the things we work for will come to be. The result is not in our hands but God's. Even the things that come to an unexpected or disappointing conclusion, there may be things that come from it that only God knows can bring about the kingdom. Jean Valier knows what he's talking about, and the L'Arche communities with individuals with major disabilities reveal the idea of living with people. Great comment. And then, Ben, how do we do these things when we work in professional capacity and guided by statutory stuff? Are these kinds of jobs pointless? Very good. That's a great observation. And how would you like to comment to these comments?
That's a good question. Thanks, Ben. I think on the first one, there is something in us that kind of needs to be successful in helping other people, and I think that's what stops us being able to accept this process of drawing alongside people and allowing ourselves to acknowledge that the kingdom of God is bigger than us, and allowing ourselves to invest in things that we might not see the immediate sort of blossoming of. I think there's something that we have to reflect on in ourselves about what motivates us to help others, what needs we're fulfilling in ourselves when we're doing that. And I think when we reflect on that a bit, that can enable us to draw alongside people in a way that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. On Ben's question, I think again there's a helpful reality there, and I think it's about how we behave in those environments. I think in whatever job we're doing, because actually if this is just for people who are able to create jobs that involve mentoring, then that means this message isn't for everyone, and that would be terrible. I think whatever job we're in, we can take that opportunity to behave in a different way. If we are in a job where the statutory things mean that we can't engage with kids in the way that we'd like to, if it's a social work job and we can't spend as much time with kids as we want to because actually the main thing is filling in forms, I'd wonder about the people that we work with, the small bit of time that we have working with people that we're there to help. We can do the best that we can with it, but what about our co-workers? What about our boss? What about the people who are working for us? Can we draw alongside them? Can we commit to getting to know them better and working with them and seeing where we encounter God with them? I think I find that a real challenge, because when I'm at work, I think that all our attention should be diverted to the people who are most in need. But sometimes it's about working with the people you're with as well. So I think we have to accept that sometimes the job will be limited when we don't want it to be limited, but we have to look for opportunities to work with people rather than for or to people. And we have to look for those opportunities and keep our eyes open and see where we spot it.
Great comments, Ben. And I'm going to step aside so you can continue with your presentation.
Great. I think, if I remember rightly, I think we've got a little video now. So I'd like us to watch this. I'm gonna move on to talk. Oh, sorry, we're both playing on the video. I'm going to move on to talk about restorative justice. I think this gives some techniques and some further sort of substance that can help us when in trying to interact with each other in this way. So let's move on to that. I think I need to start this video a little bit further on, so let me just because it's quite long. I'm going to skip it on a little bit. Now, what's happened here is there is a burglary. So the gentleman you can see on the image there, it's a reenactment, a combination of a reenactment and interviews with people. There is a burglary that's happened. This man had was broken into, and there was a fight. So he bumped into the guy that was breaking into his house. There was a big fight. As a result of that, he's now scared of going back into his house. It's really impacted him. And this is sort of what happened from there.
You feel scared. So about 2 or 3 weeks later, a police officer called me, and he said that, you know, we're conducting a study on a thing called restorative justice, where the offender meets the victim. Would you be interested in taking part?
If I'm honest, part of me sort of wanted to say sorry to this fella, but the majority of me only wanted to do the restorative justice conference to get out of the cell for an hour. Suddenly this day came, and the prison officer opened my door. It was a lunchtime, and he said, "Come on then." I'm walking along this passageway. Whether or not it's true, I don't know, but apparently the screws used to say this was where the condemned man used to go. And at that very moment, I started to feel like a condemned man. I'm thinking, I don't really want to do this. I don't want to go and meet the victims of my crimes. I don't want to meet anyone. I just want to go and lay in my bed. And we get up to the door, and I'm thinking, I don't want to be here. I just don't want to be here. Just as I went to say it, the door opened.
And there is a guy I fought about 2 months earlier, and he's in a sort of prison garb and looking really sheepish. And, you know, I'm beginning to think, you know, what the hell are we doing here? But anyway, it's going to happen. Whatever it is, it's going to happen. So here we go.
So I started going on about the poor old me's and how I've had an hard life, and giving all the social spiel, because all my life that's what I've done, give social spiel to probation officers and social workers. I thought I had everyone eating out the palm of my hands.
He's just going through the movements, just going through the same old lines, the same old trite. And I'm beginning to get very, very annoyed, very, very annoyed.
And it came to a point, and I said to
Will, when we first met. And that's it. And I just lose it completely.
And he started listing all the things that I've done. And he also started listing his feelings.
And it comes out like a fire hydrant. You know, and I said to him, I said, you know, we didn't meet at some bloody cocktail bar in Islington. You broke into my house. You destroyed my one belief that I had, which is my ability to protect my family, my house, from people like you, and you did it in one fell swoop.
I never knew it made people feel sad, angry, bad, depressed, isolated, guilty about the things I'd done. Yeah, I didn't know.
Peter was just, I mean, it was like a train hitting him. You could see that he thought, God, you know, I've done this.
It was like a flow of emotions started coming out, and I never realised it. I just never realised the damage I'd done. I never realised the harms I'd caused. I never realised how many people it affected.
And he was a man who wasn't showing remorse because the lawyer had said, you've got to show remorse and get time off. He was a man who was genuinely affected by what we had said. And we start conversing, we start talking, and Peter starts talking. He starts talking from his heart, from his real core of his existence.
When you hear the damage, what you have done, when you hear the harm you've caused, you've got to be a very, very bitter and twisted human being if this doesn't affect you. You've got to be a sicko. I was fully expecting these people who I'd done a lot of harm to say, lock him up, give him the birch, throw away the key, we don't care. But I was quite amazed. So I went back to that cell and sat there with all these feelings, you know, and I sat with them for a long time trying to work them out and separate them. And
you can't just leave him there. You've got to help him help himself. So therefore we then went out and said, listen, we want to see you change. We want to see you get yourself together. We want to help you in this process.
We'd like to see him address his alcohol and addiction problems. We'd like to see him address his offending problems. We'd like to see him maybe get some education and we'd like to see him even get a job when he gets out.
In a court of law, the victim sits in the public gallery. He, she, his family, his loved ones are the most affected by this crime and then the least involved in the process.
They don't get no input into it, and there's questions that need answering, and they can't possibly answer these questions unless they meet the harmer, the wrongdoer, the villain of the piece, the criminal.
And that's all this is bringing people around, well, it happened to be a prison table, but I mean, it could be anywhere, and having them saying, well, why did you do that? You know, do you understand how that affected me? Do you understand how that affects other people? Ever since we first met, we continue to meet. We have become, both of us, utter converts to restorative justice, to restorative approaches, to bringing offenders and victims together.
Because of that conference, it initiated change, it implemented change. I implemented the change, but it sort of gave me the kickstart I needed. You know, I can't express gratitude enough for the restorative justice program, and I've got to leave it there for a minute.
Okay, so I hope that's been a good introduction for those of you who hadn't heard of restorative justice before. I imagine many of you had, but that can be it's a very good introduction to what the process can achieve. Something that certainly for us in the UK is entirely different to what we're used to. Interestingly enough, Desmond Tutu in the earlier video, he was one of the main drivers behind the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that's because they've got a history there. When he talks about Ubuntu, they've got a history in the culture about drawing people together, and I think we've lost that in the West, and actually as the church we've been a part of that being lost, because we haven't stood up and said that our lives should be about relationships with each other. That even when we're talking about religion, we've focused on our lives between us and God rather than with each other. And I think we've really missed something there, and we're missing out on encounters with each other. I want to talk a little bit, we are running on a bit, but I'm going to talk about restorative justice, talk about how that can help us with those encounters. There's a couple of slides at the end that I'm just going to skip over, but if you want to read them afterwards, they're tables, so you can get the PowerPoint sent to you. But I'd just like to talk through this here. And this, I hope, will help us all in the communities we're in. The principles here behind restorative justice. So that the real principle is that you bring people together when harm has been caused. And you bring people together when harm has been caused to see how those people together can try and help restore and repair some of the damage that's been caused by that harm. Might not be entirely possible, but they might be able to repair some of the damage. And a lot of that might be symbolic as well. It might be through apology and forgiveness rather than through money. In that video, Peter Wolf certainly didn't start paying the other chap lots of money to repair the vase that was broken or whatever else. It was about a symbolic thing that happened that actually awakened something in the guy that was burgled and made him change as well. So in the communities that we're in, I really strongly believe that humanity is found when people of difference are brought together. And that's why in restorative justice it's so key, because you have people either end of a conflict, and that's why they're brought together, and they're different because they're either side of a conflict. In our communities, people of difference might be people of differing wealth, they might be people of differing education, they might be people of different political views, and I feel that when people are brought together and able to communicate with one another, that's where we meet God. And as people who are following the example of Jesus, what we should be doing is trying to facilitate those meetings, is trying to encourage those gatherings, rather than meeting on our own with our own kind. We should be encouraging people to join together who are different. Now that's not easy for anyone who's attempted these kinds of things. It is not easy. With these restorative justice conferences, they can take quite a lot of preparation, and preparation's really key. But it's something that releases something of more than us. You know, it releases something of God in us when these encounters take place. And actually that's the work of the kingdom there. That's the work of seeing something more than just our human beings. So just a few questions to get us thinking, then perhaps we can have a little bit more conversation, and then I'll summarize that picture again at the end. Where are the conflicts in the community or in your place of work? Where do you see those conflicts, and who responds to them, and are those people kept apart? Who are the peacemakers in your community? I know I've got a friend who loves the verse where Jesus talks about sending people into a community and to look for the peacemakers. Do we do that? Do we look for the people who have the ability to bring people together who are different? Because it might not always be us. It might not always be us that can facilitate these conversations. And who is deciding what the needs of the community are? A really key value of restorative justice is that the needs of the people involved are not decided by those who facilitate the conference. Now, if we go into a community, into a place of work, and we decide what people need, we're disempowering and we're dehumanizing. And actually, what we can do in these communities that we move into is we decide that because there is a high unemployment, we immediately think, right, so we need more jobs. And that might actually be the case. But if we don't go and talk to people and find out why people aren't accessing the jobs, then we might miss the point. We might provide a whole load of jobs that a whole load of other people might take, which I guess is good because they've got work as well. I don't want to be flippant. But I do think we have to understand what people's needs are, and the only way of doing that is by asking them. And that's something we often don't do. Okay, Stan, sorry, I know you did jump in there. I went a bit early with the questions, but if there's anything to pick up, that'd be helpful.
No, sorry, Ben, accidentally clicked on the icon when I should not have. I'm going to just ask Enton to jump in and take care of some final housekeeping items, and then we can continue with our conversation. There's a good question from James Newman, who is watching with your friend Ben Rawlings. Enton?
Thanks, Dan. I'll just jump in and share a couple of wrap-up things, but invite the rest of you to stay live with us as we keep going with the questions with Stan and Ben. Two quick questions for you. How helpful was the presentation? If you can just click on 1 through 5, and how well did you like this webinar format? And then for those of you wanting continuing education units, there are the instructions, and I'll post those as well over in our chat box to make them a live clickable link, but I invite you to stick with the broadcast until we're done. So back to you, Ben.
Ben, James asks a question, is where do you think we can find those spaces to mix and meet with people, to build relationships when so many are busy? The vulnerable are available during the day, but with nowhere welcoming to just be and chat. What changes do we need to make in order to be available to them and to build those relationships?
That's a very good question, James. I think the first thing is our and I'd say this with all of these things, is our interactions with each other. Something I had the real privilege of living. So me and Katie lived with another couple. James might know a little bit about this, and I think it changed how we were able to be with other people. That we didn't need to arrange spaces anymore, but we could just be together. And actually, I'd like to think that we could get to the stage where we could build those relationships with other people, so that it didn't have to be an organized thing. It didn't have to be putting on an event or meeting at a certain time at a coffee shop to have some sort of meeting, but these things would happen more naturally. Now, the reality is that doesn't happen straight away, and that's not where most of us are at. And so I think we just have to keep going. I think we have to, where we can, we have to change how we are with each other. We have to change how we do things like church, so that it's not so exclusive and it's not so removed from everybody. And also we have to accept where people are at. And if people are too busy or people are unable to meet, we have to accept that and just continue to be there. Enjoy. Actually, one more thing. One time we had a Christmas meal once that we did, and we ran it 3 times, and the best time we ran it was when we ran it, and as it was starting, there was no one else there, and we didn't care because we were having a great time together. So there was no attendees, there was no one who we were running it for. And actually, as it went on, lots of people came along. But I realized something there was that we were just doing something together that we enjoyed, but on top of that, we were happy to welcome people into it. And after that, we then tried to replicate the Christmas meal, and we got really annoyed when people didn't turn up because we'd all given up our Christmases and we'd put on this thing. So I think there's something about how we share our time together, that if we can share our time and we can encourage people into it, and if they come, that's great, but if they don't, that's still okay because we're enjoying each other's company. I think there might be something we can work on there.
Yeah. Mike makes the comment, Walt talks about peace not simply keeping enemies at a distance from each other, but peace is enabling people to come into embrace. And it seems like that's partly what you're talking about. And
yeah,
go ahead.
And it's an ideal, isn't it? I mean, I'm well aware that these things are, at times they can be far, far away from the reality of life for a lot of people. I think a true peace is when people in conflict can come together, and they might not be able to then see each other again afterwards. So we talk about in restorative justice, if there's a really serious crime, death by dangerous driving, murder or manslaughter, the parents or relatives of the victim, after they've seen the offender, they probably don't want to see them again afterwards, and that's understandable. But actually that coming together has brought a peace for both of them. And there's a difference between an external peace, so when two people are kept apart and they don't fight anymore, that's an external peace. But internally, both of them are still full of anger and violence and resentment. When you hold on, understandably, when you hold on to the resentment and anger you have for someone who's hurt you, you might not hurt them anymore. You might not fight them if you saw them, but internally you're not at peace anymore. And the only way that you can get peace with that is by coming together with them and acknowledging the differences that you have. And I think that's the peace we should strive for. I do think we should understand, though, when the time is right for that extent.
Yeah. I think we have lost Ben momentarily, and we'll give it a couple more seconds to see if Ben can rejoin us. Mike, Katie makes a wonderful comment in the development of the disabled community self-advocacy. They say nothing about us without us, and that is so true. Mike says, yes, the video is really striking in the sense. I thought the videos, Ben, in your presentation were just wonderful. Really brought home the themes that you were bringing about in this webinar. And Ben adds, does the short-term nature of restorative justice work suggest that working with people does not always have to take many, many years?
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that, and I quite there's the potential that actually there's something in drawing people together, even if it's for a moment, that is encouraging people to work together with each other. And actually, there's definitely something we can explore in our thinking there, because as a facilitator of that, you're working quite intensively with both parties and you're preparing them both. But it's very clear what your role is. And once the conference has happened, or the interaction, it might be a letter, it might be a phone call. Once that's happened, your role finishes. And that's quite interesting, that the thinking around that of how can we work with people that doesn't take years and years. And I think there's something there.
As you've talked about restorative justice, the things that you've said and have shared today can be applied to how we think about congregational outreach and evangelism and those other things that it seems to be that we go about identifying a need, trying to fix people, and rather than just trying to be invited to their table to learn from them and to share with them.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, this has been such a wonderful presentation. We've had some great comments and questions that have been shared by people joining us. We want to be sensitive to the time involved and recognizing that your day is getting late for you. And so we want to give you time to break away and to have the rest of the evening with your family. So thank you, Ben. This has been a terrific presentation. Your content was superb. Everything about it was just marvelous. And for everyone that participated, thank you for your support. We greatly appreciate you checking in with us, sharing with us, and it's because you connect. It makes this possible. And so thank you once again. Ben, any closing comments?
I will just say, one thing. I'm going to go back to this picture. So thank you for participating. I've really enjoyed it. This picture here, the one thing that really struck me when looking at it was this idea that actually, as when Jesus talked about us being like little children, and I wonder if this picture shows that. So Charlie's there going up the slide, and he loved that park. There's actually a metal tank in the background as well, just to add to it. And there's this swear word that's written there right in front of his face, and it doesn't bother him. It doesn't bother him at all. And actually, I wonder, when we interact with people, when we move into areas, we can become obsessed with the poverty or the wealth, the unemployment or the employment, this statistic or that statistic. And actually what we need to do is be like little children and go and play in the park and go and engage. And I think there's something important that we can learn there. So I'd like to leave you with that thought. Thank you. I've really enjoyed myself, and I hope there's been a few things for different people to take away.
Thank you. And also want to, again, give thanks to everyone's here. And then I want to be mindful of the support of Bristol Baptist College, Urban Life, and Urban Expression and Baptist Together, along with the Church of the Brethren, that were able to provide these terrific webinars. So wherever you are connecting from, we wish you a good afternoon and a good evening. Bye-bye, and God bless. Thank you, Ben.